this is your first time, the Russell Cleary Leadership Lecture is meant to welcome speakers of national and international renown, and today's speaker, Harry Kraemer, is no exception to that rule. The Cleary family has been very supportive to us in a multitude of ways to the universities. For instance, they not only support this series, they also, you would notice, would be supportive of the building, the Cleary Center. They also support a College of Business Administration Scholarship Fund, which is the Russell G. Cleary Memorial Scholarship Fund. And one of the reasons that the scholarships are so important is that, if you don't know this, nearly 40% of the College of Business Administration majors graduate with no student debt. That's an impressive thing, and that's due a lot to our donors giving scholarships for students. The Cleary Scholarship, as well as other scholarships, is also one of the reasons why UWL students are ranked number 13 in the nation for repaying their debts. Obviously, scholarships keep those debts low, and so then the students have a better chance of repaying it very quickly and on time. So we have to thank the Clearys for that, as well as other donors. Now, I'm wondering, we were supposed to have a representative of the Cleary Scholars here today, Thomas Miller, but I don't know if he made it. But is there any other student here that is a Cleary Scholar? All right, well, no. Okay, that's all right. It's during classes. Sometimes, it's hard to get in here because of the timing.
Going to class is important.
Huh?
Going to class is important.
Oh, yeah, no kidding. Yes, going to class is important. Here, have a piece of pizza and keep on moving. So anyway, it's my pleasure at this point to introduce Provost Betsy Morgan. Dr. Morgan has been provost since 2015. She has a long history of commitment to student success. One of her major goals is to improve retention rates for traditionally underserved students, with a particular focus on passage rates and gateway courses. Additionally, she's also pursuing university initiatives associated with increasing all students' sense of belonging at UWL. Additionally, she's excited about this fall's launch of the new Pre-Health Advising Center for UWL undergraduates interested in pursuing healthcare-related fields. Her laser-like focus on student retention initiatives ensure that students don't walk out with a lot of debt. It's important that they do graduate because, as you know, college debt with no degree can trouble a student forever financially. So we're appreciative of Dr. Morgan's efforts to support students, and with no further ado, I hand this over to Provost Betsy Morgan.
With so many of our colleagues and community partners here involved in healthcare, we have about 10,000 undergraduates here at UWL. 2,000 of them have a declared track associated with pre-health, so OT, PT, pre-med, pre-pharmacy, all of those. So we're looking forward to helping to serve them better. They asked me to introduce the Clearys, and I thought, well, that's kind of pointless to this group. These are really, truly folks who need no introduction. I said the Clearys are what I would refer to as the large print on the fabric of La Crosse, and it's just delightful to be here with the family. Of course, the series and the luncheon named after Russell Cleary, and if you are new to the area, particularly famous for building the G. Heilemann Brewing Company up from the 15th in the brewing industry up to the 4th during his presidency and CEO of that company. And just a little hint, because I got to sit with Gail at lunch, those are hops in the middle of your table there. Now, do not steal them and take them home to brew. They are plastic. However, there's a little tip from me to you. Just don't do that. We're delighted to have Gail here and both of his two daughters, Christine and Sandra. Where am I going here? There we go. And I'll introduce Christine in just a few minutes. I did want to spend just a few sentences on why these types of events are so important to the life of the university. There's a few of us around here who work daily at the university, and it's my own personal hope that I never lose sight of the privilege of getting to come to work with students and ideas and applications of ideas. It's an extraordinary privilege. And one of the people who knows that type of privilege is with us today, because we have our former Chancellor, Doug Hosted, and his wife, Nancy, here. We're delighted to have you here. because I've been here since 1993, Doug and I go way back, and I did have to rip the Carol pin off of him and put a UWL pin on him. So when they file yet another report with HR about me, this time it's going to be that. I don't have enough time to tell you the story why, but I will tell you that for many months in my career as a young faculty member here, when I walked around campus, people would yell, "Hey, cookie girl!" And I'd say, mm-hmm. And that is because our Chancellor Hofstede, had neglected to provide cookies associated with one of his fall remarks. And I was called upon to be the champion of the people. So I corrected the cookie situation, and seriously, complete strangers would go, "Hey, you're cookie girl." So thanks, Doug, that really helped. I'm always just hoping it's not a reference to my weight, because that's just not as flattering as you walk across campus. So an event like today is special, even for those of us who do get to work at a university. As everyone in this room knows, the quality of our thoughts in all of the roles we play and the outcomes that associated with our decisions are enriched when we take the time to learn from experts in the field. The Cleary Lecture is a sterling example of how the university and the business community come together so that our students, who will join, there's a couple here, but of course our massive group of students will come this afternoon, to learn from individuals who have distinguished themselves. The lunch event and the public lecture serve to allow us to take time aside from our busy schedules. And I look at this extraordinary group of people in here, and I thought the amount of sheer brain power, as well as people who get things done in this one room, is really remarkable. So thank you for taking your time to expand our horizons. As we are partners in this, it does strike me that one of the stated missions of UWL, besides student success, is the ability to promote the idea of each of us becoming lifelong learners. And everyone in this room is a testament to that goal. So speaking of lifelong learners, I'd like to introduce you to the Executive Vice President and Legal Counsel for the Cleary Management Corporation, Christine Cleary, who's going to introduce our speaker. Christine.
Thank you so much. Provost Morgan. Just because I don't think all of you know, and because there's been some undercurrent of lifelong learning, probably about 20 years ago, I wanted to go and get my executive MBA program at Kellogg. Life kind of got in the way, 3 kids, whatever. And so I just went back 2 years ago after our youngest, we became empty nesters. My husband, such a good partner, kind of teed me back up and said, "You can do it." So I went back and got my degree last June. And actually hit, well, thank you. Harry was actually one of my professors. So, as I said, I could tell you a lot about him. In fact, I could give a speech about what he's accomplished, the many roles he's had in life. But I don't need to do that, because you can go online and you can go and check it all out. And he might give you hints during his talk. But instead, I'm going to focus on one thing that really resonated with me during his lectures. And he made a point of that he had about 10 years ago a student called Andrew, and I think it's Yoon, thank you, that took a field trip to Kenya. While he was there, he found that by applying some modern technology could dramatically increase the annual crop yield. When Henry's Leadership book came out and was published, he told Andrew that all of the proceeds from his speaker's fees and from his books would go to sponsor the program that Andrew Yoon is doing in Kenya. The program is called 1 Acre Fund. And that is what, you have a professor that guides you on your principles, but he backs it up with ability to make it happen. I think that's just awesome. So what Harry has done is about 8 years ago, he promised to do a talk a month, but he's actually, I think, done about 800 talks, and I think if you calculate that, that's a lot more than one a month. As I said, I talked to Harry before I went back to school, being a lifelong learner, and he helped me decide that it was something that would really have a value. And I guess, again, I want to think through the last 3 speakers we've had, and I don't know if you other ones have listened to them, but we have been very blessed with 3 exceptional speakers, and we have really, the bar is being indeed raised even higher with Harry. We are much honored to have Harry join us today for his lecture and his willingness to answer questions. So thank you very much.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, it is just my honor to be with all of you, and it was fantastic to have Christina as a student and to get to know Mrs. Clear, and I love to think about some of the people that really can make an enormous difference as leaders, and obviously Mr. Clear is one of those. And one of the things, and I talked a little bit about it with Jeff over lunch, you know, we're living in a world where we know the one thing we need is more leaders, right? And everybody talks about the fact that we need more leaders, but very rarely do people get very specific, right? We say, oh, we need more leaders in business, academia, spiritual leaders. We won't even get into the whole government situation. I mean, we really truly need value-based leaders. And what I try to think about is, what really does that mean? How do each one of us realize every day we're given, we can be better than the day before. And those of us that are blessed and fortunate to influence others, how do we really develop the next generation? So that's a little bit what I focus on. What I always tell executives is that I have very, very few answers, very, very few, but like everybody in this room, I have many opinions. So I don't do Q&A, question and answer. I do a lot of Q&A, question and opinion. So as Christine knows, I'll share some opinions, but I always prefer to have more of a dialogue than a monologue. So I'll give a couple thoughts on this, but feel free, you can just jump in, you can ask anything. And I didn't mention this to Christine, but a big part of leadership, as she knows, is delegation. So if you ask me something pretty simple, pretty straightforward, I'll take it on. But if it's more cerebral, thought-provoking, I'll have to delegate that to one of my students, and Christine can answer the difficult questions. So I'm very relaxed today. I'm very relaxed today. So she's been through all the material. So when I think about opinions, one opinion I always think about is I think it's always fantastic, as busy as we all are, as many things we've got going on, to get as many different views and perspectives from as many people as we can, right? Then you can take all those views, you can take all those different things that you hear, and then say, okay, given everything I've heard, you know, what do I think? What do I think makes sense? The other opinion I have, I've realized it's always good to understand the bias of the person you're getting the opinion from, right? Because then you can say, okay, given that person's experience, how valid is that, okay? So a little bit of background. I actually went, as Christine, I went to Kellogg. I always say it was a few years ago. My wife, Julie, says, no, it was 38 years ago. And I said, Julie, it was 38 years ago for you. We were there together. That answers that. That ends that question. Because we have 5 children. She likes to tell our children that she's 35 years old. That's becoming more difficult because our oldest daughter's 31 and is at Kellogg right now in business school. So I ended up going to work at Baxter Healthcare, and I went there as a junior financial analyst for 2 years. I forgot to leave, and I was there for 25 years. Started off in planning, business development, lots of different divisions and so on. But the reality is, I always tell the Kellogg students at Northwestern, I never really left Kellogg because the way I paid my way through school is I was a math major, and when I was at business school, I graded all the finance papers for the faculty. And one of the fellows I did it for was a fellow Professor Don Jacobs, who became the dean. Bigger than life guy, he was the dean for 25 years. In fact, one of the buildings is named after him. And when I was graduating, he became the dean, and I said, hey, I'm going to miss you. He said, you're not going to miss me because Baxter's in Chicago. I know where you live. You're not going anywhere. So for 25 years at Baxter, he would call me every 2 weeks, and he'd say, I need you on a panel. I need you to be a guest speaker. And I made the mistake of saying if it wasn't for Kellogg, I wouldn't have been the CEO of a $12 billion company. He said, I'll never let you forget that. Never. So 12 years ago, when I was stepping down as the CEO of Baxter, he called me that day. He was 80 years old. He was a dean emeritus. And he said, hey, I just saw it come over the wire that you're leaving Baxter. Finally, 25 years, I want you to teach. And I said, you don't mean like have a syllabus, grade papers? That's not happening. I run companies. He said, I think you said you would do whatever I told you to do, okay? So here I am. He thought I was going to do finance because I had been a CFO, and I said, we have all these brilliant professors at Northwestern, like DWL, where they have PhDs, they're very bright people. I said, I have an MBA. I can't compete with these people. He said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I'd like to focus on leadership, value, and ethics. And it's a little bit of what Jeff and I were talking about. And he said, that's fine, but you start in 2 weeks, so you better get a syllabus together. So I've been doing this now for 12 years. And for those of you that have done teaching know that until you can explain something clearly to a group of bright people, you may think you understand it, but not really, right? That's when you really know whether you do. So one of the things I try to focus on is what are some of the characteristics of very strong leaders, and several principles that if you follow them on our journey, we could all get better, because it's not a destination, it's really a journey. And so I'm going to mention a couple characteristics and a few principles. And as I do this, what I'd encourage you to do is think about people that you know, people you worked with, worked for, read about. How many of these characteristics do the people that you admire have? And if you do believe it's a journey, which of these would you say, I've got that one nailed. That one I'm very good at, but that one I could get a little bit better, okay? So, and then again, feel free to jump in, and Christine can answer the questions for you. So, here we go. Where I like to start when I think of very strong leaders is that they're people who keep things simple. They keep things simple. Because there's this tendency, and maybe you've seen this in your profession, where somebody will come up to me and they'll say, Harry, I need to talk to you. This is very, very complicated. And my approach would be, Joe, why don't you go back to your office? Why don't you figure out how to keep it simple? Then we'll talk about it, right? But Joe says, no, it's very complicated. And you have to explain to Joe, that's why we have you. That's why we call it work, all right? And as a matter of fact, Joe, if it was already simple, we may not need you. It's a good technique, by the way. Works actually pretty good. The other way you may have heard this is they'll say, well, what kind of guy is Sam? And they'll say, very bright. The only problem with Sam is he gets a little bit lost in the trees. He doesn't see the forest. Have you heard that expression, lost in the trees? You don't hear the forest? I've worked with some people, quite a few people actually, who never even get to the trees. These are the people that are in the root system. They're in the root system. They've seen a tree, but the forest would be like the fifth dimension for these people, right? And it's a question that I think it's worth thinking about, reflecting on. How good are you and how good is your team getting from the roots to the trees to the forest? Putting it all together, looking at it globally. What's the overall mission? What are we trying to accomplish, right? Because in a lot of institutions, there's a lot of really wonderful people, but the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, right? You got these people that are in silos as opposed to everybody realizing how does what we do fit into what we're trying to accomplish overall, right? So this idea of figuring out how to keep things simple becomes incredibly important, I think. Now, Dean Jacobs taught me that it's always good to explain what something is not. So when I say simple, that doesn't mean that sometimes we don't have to get into the detail, right? Sometimes you got to get the root cause. And at Baxter, we used to use that expression, sometimes you have to dive down to the bottom of the pool, get the root cause. The problem is there are many people who dive down to the bottom of the pool and they never resurface, okay? I'm really big into oxygen, so take whatever dive you want. If you don't resurface, we have a little major issue here, okay? So this idea of simple is very important. Another one that I think a lot about is this whole idea of common sense. And when I mention this to senior executives, very often somebody will say, well, that's sort of obvious, that's kind of a given. Obviously, we'll use common sense. And again, I don't know if you've experienced in your own institutions, but when I visit institutions, I'm always reminded of my very favorite Mark Twain quote. Mark Twain, in a speech in San Francisco many years ago, said, if you stop and think about it, you actually stop and reflect, he said, everything is common sense. The problem is that common sense is not common. Right? This is where you say, wait a minute, Joe did what? Sam, really? Hello? And I think the people that are strong leaders, they keep things simple and they try to apply a lot of common sense. Right? The third characteristic, and this one is a big one for me, is that the people that are the strongest leaders, they start leading ASAP, as soon as possible. And maybe show of hands, I'm curious, how many of you are working with younger people in whatever you're doing? All right, but most people. And you can tell me whether you've observed this. Very often when I'm talking about leadership with younger people, and maybe Jeff's noticed this, very often somebody will come up to me and they'll say, I want to be a leader. I want to be a leader, but I've got this slight problem right now. And I'll say, well, Mary, what's the problem? She says, well, right now, I don't have anybody reporting to me. I mean, I can't lead anybody. Nobody works for me. And when I think about that, I realize, no, wait a minute, the people that are the strongest leaders, they start leading long before they've anybody reporting to them. And some of you are nodding. I can go back to Baxter, 30 some years ago. The group I started with, there was about 30 of us. Nobody had anybody reporting to them. We were all either in a cubicle, a bullpen. Some of us were in a car because we were a sales representative. Nobody had anybody reporting to them. But the interesting thing is, if you looked after about 3 weeks, you could guess 2 or 3 people that someday would probably be leading something, right? Now, everybody's 22 years old, so it's a little hard to tell, would it be a unit, a division, a function, a geography, the whole organization? Too early to tell. But you could guess they'd probably be leading something, and you got to ask yourself, what was it about these people? My conclusion is these are people who basically said, I'm not waiting for anything. I'll be respectful. I'll be very, very respectful of the hierarchy, but I'm going to get started. I want to make a difference. Because I think they figured out what many of us know is the sort of the simple rule of leadership, and it goes like this. Leadership has nothing to do with titles and organizational charts, right? It has everything to do with the ability to influence people. And the only way I can think of influencing people is you have to be able to relate to people, right? Through your values, through your integrity, through the trust you build up. And if I can figure out a way to relate to Betsy, maybe I can influence her, maybe I can lead her, right? It's not about boxes and organizational charts, right? And some people figure that out, and some people never figure that out, right? And when I would interview some of these folks, I'd say, well, how do you think about this? And one young person, because I get a lot of ideas from these younger people, one young person said, hey, Professor Kraemer, no, Harry, I don't know if you've thought about this, but the only people who really care about organizational charts and titles are the people that are in them. Nobody else cares, right? If it turns out that Doug is a potential supplier of mine, right? I may call Doug up, we'll talk about price, quality, timing, service level, commitment. I don't think I'm going to call Doug up and say, hey, Doug, let's spend a half an hour talking about your organizational chart, okay? I got an issue, I got an opportunity, he's either part of it in a very respectful way, I got to find somebody else, right? So that ability to get started, I think becomes very, very important, very important. Now, you may notice, when you visit a lot of organizations, very often a senior leader will say, you know, Harry, I wish more people exhibited leadership. I wish they were willing to take a risk. I wish they were a little bit more proactive than reactive. And if you visit a lot of organizations, you'll realize what slows this leadership thing down seems to be very common across organizations. Now, that one, in a way, probably shouldn't surprise me because people are people, right? So regardless of where they are, that's an issue. What surprised me, and Christine knows this because we use this in class, it turns out that not only is it similar across organization, but the names of the people who slow things down usually have the same names. That was a surprise. Most people wouldn't have guessed that. I wouldn't have guessed that. Now, I don't expect you to believe this until I give you a little example, right? And I always try to use the example in the story just to kind of make it more clear to folks, right? So we've got Jay, and we have Nancy, and we have Doug. So we'll do it in the form of a little story, okay? So here's the way this works. They all come to work for the organization, okay? They have nobody reporting to them, nobody, okay? They're 22 years old, okay? They're just, work with me here, right? Starting level, all right? And it turns out, though, Jay decides he wants to be a leader. He sees something that's going on in the organization that doesn't make sense, and he says, you know what? I think there's a better way to do it, more efficient. It'll be helpful to the community. I need to challenge this. I got to be careful how I do it because I'm 21. We have to be very careful how we do it. And Nancy says, you know what, Jay? You're right. I'm going to help you with this. We're going to try to do something about it. We'll be respectful. We got to just be proactive. Now, Doug, at least in this story, a little more conservative, a little more careful, says, wait a minute. Jay, slow down, pal. Slow down. We can't do anything yet. We're 21. We have to wait. And Jay says, well, who do we have to wait for? What's the deal? And this is where Doug, in many organizations, maybe not in yours, in many organizations says, we have to wait for a group of people called those guys. Now, this is an amazingly large group of people, okay? We talked about this. These people are everywhere, right? And we have to wait for them, okay? But Jay, really wanting to get rolling, says, well, thanks for the warning. Appreciate the warning, Doug. We'll wind our way through this. Who are they? Just let us know who they are, and we'll figure out a way to maneuver through this. But in many organizations, this is where Doug says, you know, Jay, I don't want to disappoint you. I don't want to, get you frustrated, but that turns out to be the biggest problem we have right now in this organization. We don't know who they are, okay? We have to wait for them, right? We're waiting for Godot. We're just waiting. Now we have, is it Tanner? Tanner. Now we have Tanner. Now it turns out Tanner's 21. Tanner's just started in the organization, but Tanner turns out to be the leader. And the reason he's the leader, he listens to this discussion, okay? He listens to this discussion, realizes Jay brought up a good point, Nancy solidified it was a good point, but I'm concerned what Doug said, we have to wait for those guys, right? And we don't know who they are. So suddenly Tanner says to himself, wait a minute, since nobody knows who they are anyway, why don't I tell them I am one of those guys, okay? This actually brings tears to my eyes, right? So Tanner goes to Jay, Jay, let's go, let's make it happen. Well, you must not have heard what Doug said. No, I heard him, but take a good look. I'm Tanner. I'm one of those guys. And what I try to get the students to think about, and even leaders, there's two questions I've realized that keeps this very, very simple, right? Here's the first, you can use this for yourself, you can use this for your teams, younger people, older. Question number one, whatever your role, whatever you do, whatever your tenure, have you yet decided, I'm one of those guys? I'm one of the men or women that's going to do something about it, or are you waiting? Because there's many, many people that are waiting, okay? Second question, whatever your role or whatever you're doing, are you watching the movie or are you in the movie? You watching the movie or are you in the movie, right? And again, this is a really good one. Jeff and Laura are having lunch, and Jeff says, why are we doing this, Laura? Why are we doing this? Laura says, Jeff, it doesn't make any sense. In fact, Jeff, to prove to you that it doesn't make any sense, she takes out a pad. She's writing down all the reasons it doesn't make sense. So the way I think about this is, not only is she watching the movie, she's writing a movie review. Right? But if she's in the movie, it's very, very different. So if she's in the movie, Jeff says, why are we doing this? She says, you know what? I don't know. Let's talk to Gail. Let's talk to Betsy. We're not watching the movie. We're in the movie. And think of institutions. You'll hear people say, well, if it was my institution, well, if you're in the institution, it is your institution. Right? Do you want to be a leader or not? And it's good to ask these questions because there's a lot of people that say they want to be leaders. I want to be a leader, I want to be a leader. But as we all know, this leadership thing has a little baggage associated with it. You're responsible, you're accountable, okay? It's much, much easier to sit in the stands and talk about all the problems and all the issues. And I think people that are leaders literally say, you know what? I want to do something about it. I'll be respectful, but let's go. Let's make it happen, right? That's what I think what leaders do. Now, when I think about, are there some concrete things that we can all do to make progress on this journey, I have several that I think could be helpful. And I'll go through a couple for you, and then we'll open this up for any discussion. The first one, and what I've decided over time is the most important one, is self-reflection. Okay? And the thought behind self-reflection, becoming self-aware, it goes like this. Even though many of you in the room I don't know, I would guess most people in this room have at least 2 or 3 times the number of things to do than you're ever going to be able to get done. I mean, I don't mean to disappoint you on a Monday afternoon. But if you think about your job, your career, your family, maybe your spirituality, your health, a little exercise, a little bit of sleep occasionally, right? Making a difference, a little bit of fun. We could go on. There's a lot to do. When you realize there's a lot to do and the light goes on that you may not be able to get it all done, the usual reaction is, well, I'll just go faster and faster, right? This is where the multitasking kicks in, right? And with all these crazy devices, we got Blackberries, Blueberries, iPhones, iPads, we got all this stuff. My opinion is the great lie was that this would actually make us more productive, right? It makes us more active. I'm not sure we're more productive, right? Or we take a break for 15 minutes, I can get through 10 emails, 40 texts. I'm very active. But how productive are we, right? Or are we moving so fast, we don't even know how productive we are. That would take valuable time we don't have. Let's just keep moving. And I think the very first principle of a value-based leader is that you take the time to self-reflect, which for me means you turn off the phones, you turn off all the gadgets, you get off by yourself, and you ask yourself a couple of basic questions. And the types of questions I think are helpful for a value-based leader are questions like the following. What are my values? What is my purpose? You know, no kidding around, what really matters? What kind of a leader do I want to be? What kind of example do I want to set for other people, right? At least for myself personally, I can't think about these things when I'm doing 10 other things at the same time. I just can't do it. But taking a little bit of time to think about this helps me separate out activity and productivity. It helps me get from the roots to the trees to the forest. What's important and what isn't? What are your priorities? In what order? Okay. Now, what you may be thinking, because many leaders think about, they'll say, well, sounds great, sounds amazing, but the problem is I don't have the time. I just don't have the time for this, right? Well, here's the question. Is it we don't have the time, or is this something we really don't want to do? Right? Because this could get a little sensitive, right? There could be a pretty big difference between what we say is important and what we're actually doing. That could be a little too close to home. I don't know if I want to do that. I don't have the time. Well, Most of us commute someplace, right? A lot of us try to exercise every day. Some people pray, meditate. Is it that we don't have the time, or is it something we don't want to do? Right? And I really believe that ability to slow down enough to figure out, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Where are we going? I think has an enormous impact on how you operate as a leader. All right? Now, students will say, well, can you give me some examples? I'll give you an example of the habit that I've had for many years, but it's an opinion because there's an infinite number of ways to do this, right? Some of you may have gotten up at 6 o'clock this morning, gone for a walk, gone for a jog, done a little bit of praying or whatever. The exercise I've done now for almost 40 years is a personal self-examination at the end of every day, all right? Maybe it's 5 children, a lot of running around, a lot of teaching. For me, it's usually midnight, and I go through a personal self-examination. What did I say I was going to do today? What did I actually do? What am I proud of? What am I not proud of? How did I lead people? How did I follow people? If I lived today over again, what would I have done differently? And then the last one is, if I have tomorrow, being fully well aware of the fact that sooner or later I won't, but if I do have tomorrow, and I'm a learning person, based on what I learned today, how will I operate differently tomorrow? Whatever dimension of your life has any significance, right? As a parent, as a sibling, as a spouse, if you have a spiritual orientation, whatever really matters. It just puts things into perspective, right? This whole idea of being self-reflective. Now, again, just to describe for a moment what this is not, just for clarity, this is not self-absorption. This isn't studying the cosmos. This isn't, let's spend a couple of hours contemplating our navel. No, no, no. This is, what are your values? What are you going to do about it? Okay? That's why I call it from values to action. Okay? And now, interesting, people that have known me, friends of mine would say to me, boy, for a guy who studied mathematics and economics, this sounds a little qualitative. Where's the calculus? Where's the differential equations in this, right? So what mathematics, people who study math do, any math people here that study mathematics? Most don't admit it, so I appreciate you probably admitting it. What we do is we put things into equations to convince ourselves that everything related to leadership starts with self-reflection, right? And so here's a little 3-part deal without any numbers to convince you, right? It goes like this. First part, number 1, if I'm not self-reflective, if I'm not, is it possible for me to know myself? I don't think so. The second part is, if I don't know myself, is it possible for me to lead myself? I don't think so. Third part is, if I can't lead myself, how can I lead other people? Right? A then B, B then C, C then a transitive property of equality from algebra 1. It matters. It really matters, right? So this whole idea of self-reflection, it's huge. It's huge. The second one is balance. And this is an interesting one because we could talk about virtually any topic this afternoon. We could talk about the situation in the Middle East. We could talk about North Korea. We could talk about the current state of U.S. governmental politics. We won't do that. You name the topic. And immediately people have very strong opinions. Very strong opinions. The problem I find very often is that people with very strong opinions have very little understanding of perspectives other than their own. They understand theirs, but they don't understand anybody else's, right? And I think the person who's a value-based leader, partially as a result of being self-reflective, is that they take the time to understand all sides of the story. Okay? Or the other way you may have heard it, I think Stephen Covey talks about this, but I think he may have stole this from St. Francis, is that the value-based leader seeks to understand before they're understood. I think about that one every day, right? If I'm having a discussion with Jeff, I will try to never say, hey Jeff, I don't understand where you're coming from. Because I've actually realized that's actually ignorant. If I take the time, I can understand. Then I'll decide, do I agree or disagree? Right? So that ability to truly take the time to understand multiple perspectives, I think it's huge. Right? And in addition to doing that, the other thing I try to get people to think about is every aspect of your life you need to think about a balance. Right? And very often, oh, by the way, here's an expression. I'm curious how many folks have heard about this. Raise of hands here. How many have heard this expression, work-life balance? I'm just kind of curious. How many, have you heard this one? This probably, maybe it's my mathematic background. This I've always found to be the most confusing expression, right? So just think about this again. Work-life balance. It sounds like you're either working or you're living, okay? Now, since some of us are working quite a bit, if that's not part of living, that's problematic, okay? So I never think about work-life balance. I think about life balance, right? And it's interesting, I interviewed several hundred people when I was writing this, and if you mention to people, how do you think about your life balance? They start to think about their family, their spirituality, their health, their job. Their career is important. We got to get the work done. Taking care of yourself. We're here for a blink of an eye, so maybe you feel a moral obligation to make the world a better place. There's a lot. But what I notice is very often, and maybe you've seen this with your friends personally, they'll say, you know, Harry, I'm having trouble balancing things. I'm having trouble balancing things. My observation is the great majority of people that are having trouble balancing things have not been self-reflective to figure out what they're trying to balance, right? Because if you don't know what you're trying to balance, how could you possibly balance it? That's why self-reflection becomes pretty important, right? So self-reflection, balance. The third one is true self-confidence, right? And I always double underline the word true, because very often leaders will say, well, what's the true thing? You're either self-confident or you're not. Well, no show of hands, but many of us in this room have worked for people who can act very self-confident, who have no self-confidence at all. You've run into these people. This is the macho, do what I told you to do, I've never made a mistake crowd. I'm not talking about those folks. I'm asking a very different question. Do you have true self-confidence? And the way I think about this as an opinion is I'm well aware of the fact that there will always be people brighter than I am, more athletic, more articulate, but I'm okay. I know what I know what I don't know, I'm a learning person, I'll get better each and every day. I'm a work in process, okay? What true self-confidence is not. It's not egotistical, it's not arrogant, it's not obnoxious, nor is it complacent. It isn't, I'm pretty good, but I'm going to get better each and every day. I'm called to get better each and every day, right? Now, sometimes folks will say to me, well, how do you know if you have true self-confidence? How do you know? So here's two questions I've realized that are helpful if you want to take the time to think about. By the way, this isn't an advertising campaign, this isn't an interview. No, you're by yourself, doors closed, look in the mirror, maybe you have your significant. Do you have true self-confidence? Here's two great questions. Question number one, whatever your role, whatever you're doing, whatever your age, have you reached a point yet in your life where you're comfortable to say, I don't know. I don't know. I'll find out. You tell me, Jeff, how fast you need an answer. I'll get it, but I don't know. And I'm not going to wing it. I'm not going to pretend I do. I do know somebody who knows, or I'll find somebody who does, but I don't happen to. Are you willing to admit you don't know? Okay. Second question. Have you reached a point in your life where you're comfortable to say, I was wrong? Forget what I said. What Doug says makes more sense. Let's do that. Are you willing to admit that you were wrong? Then you have to ask yourself the question, why is it there's so many people, they don't want to admit they don't know, and they don't want to admit that they were wrong? Why is that? Well, here's a guess. I'm not sure. But if Tanner's my boss, and I say, hey, Tanner, I don't know, I just don't know, I may be worried what he may think about me. He may not think I'm not one of his best people, right? Well, let's go back to the formula again. If leadership is about the ability to influence people, and the way you influence people is you relate to people, it turns out most people don't relate well to people who know everything. In fact, most people don't relate particularly well to people that never make a mistake, right? If I say, Tanner, I don't know, but I'll find out pretty quick, I'm actually betting Tanner may say, hey, I can relate to Harry. Oh, if you can relate to me, maybe I can influence you and I can lead you, right? It actually works the opposite of what a lot of people fear. Now, this is all a pretty experienced group. When I'm talking to younger students sometimes, I have to go back to balance for just a moment, right? If Doug is my boss and every time Doug asks me a question, I say, Doug, I don't know, I have a larger problem, right? I'll be unemployed, right? So you do need to know your job, okay? But the way I think about it is, you don't have to know everything, but you should probably know who does. And the big lesson I always mention to the students on this one was from Mr. Graham, who is one of the founders of Baxter Travenol, Baxter Healthcare. And it was very interesting. When I first became the chief financial officer, he took me to lunch. And he said, Harry, there are many people, maybe some of us in the room, he said, many people that before they get promoted to the next job, they feel they need to know everything about that job or they're not really qualified for it. So he said, Harry, I'm the chairman of the board. I'm looking over the next 5 years of finding out the next CEO. And I'm looking at 5 or 6 people. You're one of them, but there's 5 or 6 other people. He said, Harry, if you needed to know everything about being the CEO before you got in the job, how long would it take you? I said, Mr. Graham, I just became the CFO. I only know about half this job. I don't really know. He said, well, I do know. He said, I follow this. This is what I do. He said, I'm watching all of you guys. He said, if you needed to know everything about being the CEO before you got in the job, you'd be about 185 years old. But he said, I got great news for you, great news. And I think this is applicable for all of us. He said, any job that anybody in this room is in today or will ever be in the future, the rest of your career, it turns out there's only two things you have to know. He said, the first thing you have to know is, what are you really, really good at? What's your skill set, leadership, values, analytical? What are the things you're really good at? That's the first thing you have to know. And he said, the only other thing you have to know is who knows what you don't know. I said, Mr. Graham, this is going to work out great. I got about 40 people who know what I don't know. I keep them very close. Right? And it's interesting. Here's the simple thought. When I talk with executives sometimes, they'll say, you know, this self-reflection, there's a lot to this. Balance, I really need to focus on this. I got a real problem with this true self-confidence thing. A fellow said to me, I said, what's the problem? He said, I got 800 people working for me. He said, there's no way I want them to know what I don't know. I keep my cards very close to the vest. I am not going to divulge what I don't know. What do you think about that? And of course, I'm the guy who's got to explain to this fellow, they already know what you don't know, okay? I mean, no show of hands, anybody in this room ever had a boss, you couldn't write a book what they didn't know. I could write some pretty long books, okay? True self-confidence. So I never think about self-confidence without true, which gets me to the fourth and final, which is genuine humility. And I never think about humility without genuine, right? And here's the thought process. This is where often a student will say, well, you seem to think this genuine humility is pretty important. How do you know if you have genuine humility? And if you think you have it, do you really have it? There's a great question, okay? So what I realized was, how to think of a good question to get students to think about this. And so I think this one works out pretty well. I've used this a lot, and when I ask you the question, think about how you would answer this question. Here's the question. How did you get to where you are so far? We've got a lot of very accomplished people in the room. People have done a lot of great things. How did you get to where you are so far? The top two responses, having done this several hundred times, the top two responses anywhere in the world are, well, Harry, how did I get to where I am? I worked very hard. I worked very, very hard, and I have several skill sets. And the combination of working hard and skill sets, that's how I got to where I am. Now, if I think about this personally, quickly, I could say, well, I worked pretty hard, and I got a couple skill sets, but since now we're all a little self-reflective, right, a little self-reflection, maybe there's a couple other things that have impacted your career. I'll give you 5 that have impacted my career. Whether they've impacted you folks or not, I don't know, but here's 5 from me. No particular order, but math guys, we number things, right? Number 1, luck. Let's take a break for a moment to talk about luck. I was a very lucky person. Now, you hear these little discussions, can you plan for your own luck? Can you prepare? Maybe. All I know is I was pretty lucky, number 1. Number 2, timing. Being in the right place at the right time for me was amazing. I have some friends, they combine luck and timing. My timing was so remarkable, I give it its own special category. Why? I have no idea whether this happened to anybody else in the room. Several times I got promoted. The person who was in the job before me, when they were in the job, they accomplished nothing. You replace these people, you actually look like you walk on water, okay? I actually said a couple of times, hey, I'm just breathing. Big improvement over the last guy that was in the job. Incredible timing. Number 3, the team, okay? I mean, as everybody in this room knows, there are some really, I think of that group of 30 people that I started with 30 some years ago, there were 5 or 6 of those people. They could do the work of 3 or 4 people. It was amazing. I could barely do my own work, but rather than getting worked up about it, I thought, they can do the work of 3 people. I'm relatively confident they can't do the work of 20 people, right? If I can figure out this relate, influence, and lead, trust, integrity, however, I think it'll be okay. I think it'll be okay. But if it's all about the team, then it can't be all about you, right? So it's how do you develop people, how you care about, how you treat people the way you want to be treated. A lot of really basic stuff, okay? The team. Luck, timing, the team. The 4th one, many of us have been fortunate enough to have mentors, advisors, people who helped us out, picked us up, brushed us off, put us back in the batter's box, right? And never forgetting those people played an enormous role in helping us get to where we are, right? And then the 5th one, a little bit more personal. For some of us, there's a spiritual perspective on this. For me, these are talents I know I've received from the man upstairs. If any of those work for you, could be luck, could be timing, could be the team, could be mentors, could be a spiritual piece, could be some combination of all the above. I've noticed what happens in the leaders I've seen, once that gets connected, is that, first of all, you never forget where you came from. You never forget where you came from, because most of us start off with very little or nothing. You keep things in perspective. At Baxter, we used to say, you don't read your own press clippings, or if you do read them, you don't necessarily believe them. Okay, now, I used to say that, but now, for the last 20 or so months now it really calls into question, because now it could be, I guess, fake news or something. I mean, I don't even know if it's possible. I'm lost now, right? So you don't forget where you came from. You keep things in perspective. You don't read your own press clippings. And the last one, which I think is really critical, that some people in the room, I'm sure, realize, is that the higher up you go in an organization, there better be a few people who knew you well before you became a big shot, right? Because on the way to becoming a big shot, there are some people that are going to start to say, Harry, you're amazing. Harry, you're fantastic. If Harry's not careful, Harry could start to believe it. And as soon as you start to believe it, you have a major, major problem, okay? And I always think about this, actually, this is actually a pretty good example, is wide as that doorway is there, I know people, maybe you know them, I know people who physically could not get their head through that doorway, right? And you say, well, how could that be? I mean, how could that be? They went to school with this. I mean, well, think about it. If you actually believe it's all about you, and you forget about luck, timing, the team, mentors, somebody upstairs, you forget about that, you think it's all about you. Well, it's all about you, then it's not about others. And I go back to my favorite equation again. If leadership is about the ability to influence people, and the way you influence people is you relate to people, it turns out most people do not relate well to egomaniacs. Most people do not relate well to people where it's all about them, right? And then I think the light starts to go on, for some people earlier than others, depending on your spiritual background, your life, your parents, your upbringing, you start to realize every single person matters, right? But see, the reason I say genuine is that we've all worked for people who say that. They'll literally say, well, everybody's important. But then you watch what they do, and you realize it's just a bunch of talk. And to fake this, you really look stupid, right? I think a lot of people get to a point they forget how bright the average person is, because they're watching you. As the leader, they watch everything you do, right? Which is, I'm always trying to explain to leaders, it is an incredible blessing to be a leader, because you can have an unbelievable influence on people. The problem is, that can be an influence that's very positive, or can be unbelievably negative. Pick up the newspaper, right? It's incredible, right? So that ability to think this through, it's huge. It's huge. The last example, before we open this, leave some time for discussion, I would tell the students, I have an office downtown Chicago for some work we do with a firm where we look at healthcare companies. And anytime I'm there late at night, at least in our building, I always know when it's exactly 10 o'clock on the 46th floor of our building, because right at 10 o'clock, these three women get off the elevator on the 46th floor. And if you ever, in Chicago, stop by 70 West Madison, you can eat off the floor of this building. This building is unbelievable. And it's because these three women that are the cleaning crew. So they get off on the 46th floor exactly 10 o'clock. And I thank them for what they're doing. My office is right next to the elevator. And I'm always sensitive to the fact that I don't speak Polish. They don't speak English. So I'll show them pictures of the 5 children. I'll show them pictures. And I don't think I take more than 5-10 minutes, but I'll just empty out the trash baskets in 5 or 6 of the offices. And it's incredibly helpful to me, because it always reminds me that if it wasn't for luck, timing, the team, mentors, and something upstairs, I could easily be part of the cleaning crew, right? And I tell the students, it's a great example of the ultimate win-win, because it feels like the right values-driven thing to do. It kind of feels like it's what you should do, right? But the reason I say win-win is that even if that light didn't go on and you're trying to build teams, it's still what exactly you would do, because that's how you build teams. And Julie will always tease me, because anytime I come home late at night, I've got all these Polish cakes and cookies and all this. These are my buddies. These are my buddies, right? So that ability to put it all in perspective, right? So this whole concept of you keep it simple, you use common sense, you start as soon as you can, and then on this journey, if you can become a little more self-reflective, if you can develop a little bit of balance in how you think about everything in your life, you have true self-confidence and genuine humility, you can lead yourself, and you can lead just about anybody, okay? So that's the summary of my 30-hour class in 35 minutes. So taking any questions either on things I've talked about or things I didn't get into that would be helpful to talk about on any topics. Happy to take any questions. Here we go. Well, you wrote the book here, Jeff, so you shouldn't be asking the question.
So I think for rising leaders, one of the most difficult problems is they read your books, they saw your lecture, they went to school, they are very fired up. They are ready to go. They got promoted to a mid-level position. And when they look up above them is a disaster.
Yeah.
It's none of the 5 points.
Yeah.
They didn't read any of the books.
Yeah.
They are not behaving in a reasonable fashion. What's your advice for them to navigate that, to try and make their way in the face of that?
Yeah, so Jeff, it's perfect you bring this up because first of all, it's the real world. In fact, often folks will say, what percentage, and you and I do the same kind of work on this, what percentage of people really truly get what we're talking about that are in those positions now? Optimistically, I'd say maybe 20%, okay? So we're dealing with 80% of the universe here, right? So advice or an opinion, and I have two pieces. The first thing I tell folks is you can either, so I always have to role play this, okay? So I'm kind of like a mid person, right? You're one of the senior guys, and I'll just make up, let's just assume that, you're just not a great guy. I'm just assuming this, right? But you're the boss. And I think what a lot of folks, and Betsy and I really want to make a difference, but often we could easily say, well, there's not much we can do here because, Jeff's there, and until Jeff gets his act together, it has to start from those guys, whatever. Well then, the way I tell the students is, wait a minute, you know what? Maybe, I was trying to be optimistic, maybe the reason that Jeff doesn't get it is just never thought about it before, or he's never seen it before, or, how did he grow up? Maybe some of these people you and I are talking about, maybe they just had the wrong parents. I mean, something went wrong with some of these people, right? So let's give the person the benefit of the doubt. And the way I think about it is, if, let's say that I've got 10 people working for me, and she's got 10 people, Doug's got 10 people. Well, I can either wait around, Jeff, for you to change, or I think to myself, wait a minute, no, I know exactly what I need to do. So I've got 10 people. Well, guess what? How I treat those people, how I develop those people, how I treat those people the way I'd like to be, all the things you and I know. Well, what I've observed several times is, you're watching this, and you're not really, don't get it, but then all of a sudden you say to yourself, wait, why does everybody want to work for Harry? Why are they not working for Betsy and Doug? And why is it I can't get anybody to leave? Maybe there's something to this. Maybe there's some light that can go on. So number one, I'm just a great believer, Jeff, through, as you well know, in your personal example, you can make an enormous impact, okay? That's number one. Number two, there's this whole area that I've been fooling around with a lot, Jeff, that I put under this phrase, what's your ability as a leader to lead up? And the thought on that one is, most people in this room, you kind of get relatively good at managing your team, right? You kind of get the idea of how you deal with your peers, right? I mean, Betsy doesn't work for me, I don't work for her, but we kind of figure out a way to work together. But what do you do when the person above you either doesn't get it, doesn't want it, and you can't have an impact? Well, do you have the ability to lead up, okay? And when I say leadership, influence, and relate, I tell the students, this relate is huge, right? I've got to figure out how to relate to you, okay? And when you want to do something that really doesn't make sense to do I have the ability, through my influence, by proving to you I have absolutely no personal agenda here other than to do the right thing, can I figure out a way to influence you, all right? And by the way, maybe I know that you're not going to listen to me because you're very hierarchical and I'm at a lower level. Well, I do my homework, okay? And I know that Laura is your equal, and she's a good friend of yours, and she does influence you. So rather than dealing with you directly, I'll go to Laura and say, hey, Laura, you know what? I think Jeff's wanting us to do something. I don't think it makes sense. Here's why. And if I can win her over, maybe she can influence you, right? So I gotta use every vehicle I can to help make that happen. And then the last piece, Jeff, which as you know, is the toughest, is if it's a big problem, and if I can't get anywhere, and I've tried the best I can, then I ask two questions of myself. Is this a really big deal? Because as you and I know, you only have a certain amount of silver bullets, right? And is this a really big deal? And then do I have true self-confidence? Because if it's a really big deal and I have true self-confidence, I'm going to your boss. I'm going to your boss. And people say, well, you could lose your job. Well, guess what? I could lose my job, but if it's the right thing to do, and I have true self-confidence, I will get another job. And by the way, if it turns out I can get to her and she's a good person, maybe we can fix this. I'm either watching the movie or I'm in the movie. That's the way I think about it. What else? Yes, what's your name?
It's Mike.
Mike?
I've been trying to think how I can phrase this question. I still don't think I've come to it, but as you know, we talk a lot about leadership, and a lot of times it's related to your job. But as you're entering that phase of your life when you're looking towards retirement, how can we take some of those self-guidance principles that you've talked about, leadership principles, when we don't have a job to go to every day? I mean, I get all proud that my raspberries are trimmed up and I'm getting a good yield, but you know, I suppose get involved in groups would be probably the simple answer, but is there any research on that? Or?
Yeah, so here's, Mike, this is a great one. This is a great one to think about. And particularly if you're a self-reflective person, you realize we really are here for a blink of an eye, and you almost feel the obligation, how can you make a difference in the world, right? And so my first recommendation for folks is to take the time before they retire, even maybe 5 years before, to start to think through, given my God-given talents, given things that I personally am passionate about, where could I make a big difference, right? Is it teaching? Is it writing? Is it, helping out with soup kitchens? Is it doing something at your church or your temple or whatever? And in my mind, it's literally taking the time to think about this. In fact, you raise a good thought, Mike. I think about this a lot with people. When we talk about self-reflection, I always tell folks, I've convinced anybody in this room, Mike, can figure out whether somebody else is self-reflective by talking to them for about 15 minutes. And you say, well, really? Yeah, it turns out, and here's why. I don't know if you've thought about this, but people that are not self-reflective, they're constantly surprised. And you're surprised, they're surprised. See, I'll give you an example. I'm at the airport, I run into a former student. Joe, how are you doing? Well, I'm just really surprised. Joe, what are you surprised about? Well, I have 2 young boys. I have no relationship with my 2 sons. I'm very, very surprised. Well, Joe, do you spend time with your 2 sons? I don't spend any time with them at all, but yet you're surprised, right? Or the other day, a woman came up to me, a student, and I said, well, are you okay? Molly, you okay? Well, I'm just really surprised. Molly, what are you surprised by? Well, my grandfather died the other day, and I wanted to spend more time with him. I wanted to really make sure that we spent a lot of quality time together, and he suddenly died. And I said, oh, it must have been really unfortunate. How old was he? Well, he was 99 years old. And I'm thinking, it's a surprise that he died? I mean, why are you surprised? See, because if you're self-reflective, there's not that many things to be surprised by, right? So this one, I'm at an age now where I got a lot of friends that retire. Well, I don't know if you've seen this, but at least what I've seen is when somebody says they're going to retire, what they usually do is they take a trip around the world for 3 weeks, they golf every day for 2 weeks, and then it's Monday, right? And then it's like, well, what am I going to do? And it's like, are you surprised? I mean, you're working crazy hours, doing all these things, and all of a sudden you have no plans on what to do. And of course, it gets even worse than that, because then the guy says to his spouse, well, hey, guess what, honey? We're going to be able to spend every day together now, whatever. And she says, guess what? You being home for lunch is going to be a dramatic problem for me. Okay? You hear that line? Was it for better or worse, but not for lunch, right? Now, if you decided before you retired, hey, I want to teach, or I want to work at the library, I want to do a nonprofit, I want to do something over in Africa or whatever, but to have no plan at all and be surprised, that's a surprise, right? So, and I think there's so many, oh, by the way, the reason why I'm very fanatical about people thinking about this, I don't know if you guys have thought about this, but I do this in our healthcare classes. You forget how fast life goes by. For anybody in healthcare knows, I think it was 1965 when they put in Medicare, Medicaid. The reason they put it in at 65 years old is the average American in 1965 lived till 65. So the way they set up this system was, to be a little comical here, is that you were supposed to work till 65, you took a trip over to Europe, your homeland, you came back, and you died. Well, the reality of life is the average person in this room now is going to live till almost 90 years old, okay? Could be 95 years old. The children born last year, in 2017, supposedly is the first year of birth that on average people live to 100. All right? Well, think about it. Normal distribution. If the average person is going to live to 100, that means 20% of those people will live to 120, right? So somebody who retires at 60, okay, there's a reasonable chance they could be retired for longer than they worked, okay? So thinking about, okay, what's my second or third career? What am I going to do? I think it's something people really need to focus on. And there's, you know, thinking about it, praying about it, talking to a lot of different people. There's a lot of folks that can use a lot of help. So that's the way I think about it. Yeah. What else? What's your name?
Jeff.
Jeff.
So you're in healthcare.
Yeah.
And great comments and love the perspective on leading yourself and leading an organization. How do you take that and move that into the industry? And you know where healthcare is.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on how we can accomplish, you know, change, positive change?
Yeah.
In the bigger perspective, if you're the best you can for yourself and with your company.
Yeah. So I'll give you an opinion, and the reason I would say opinions is because it's an opinion, and there's other people know a lot more, right? So this guy ran a large healthcare institution, so he probably knows more about this than I do. I have this habit, by the way, of keeping everything simple. How I started this thing up, I keep things very, very simple to the point where maybe it's too simple. But the way I think about it is my biggest issue with healthcare in this United States is I don't think we have healthcare. I think we have sick care. We've gotten so good at taking care of people after they've gotten sick, okay, or after they're obese, and then they have diabetes and then renal failure, right? And so in my mind, in talking to some people, sometimes they'll say, well, we spend so much more on healthcare in this country as a percentage of our GDP than other countries, but you don't live any longer than other countries. And I said, well, why is that? And a lot of the healthcare economists would say, but also people that are physicians, they'd say, no, the miracle isn't that we should be living longer. It's that the average lifestyle of an American, it's amazing we can keep them alive for as long as we do, right? And the example, I don't know if it's still true now, but the example, you know, that I use that summarized the whole thing for me, because one of my accounts I used to always call on the Cleveland Clinic, and I'm sure my friend has been here, but I can remember going there 15 years ago, and I always tease the students now, I don't know if it's still there, I haven't been there for a while. You know what is in the lobby of the Cleveland Clinic? McDonald's. That sums it up for me, okay? You get a triple bypass, and by the way, let's grab 2 Big Macs on the way out, okay? I mean, it's this, 35% of the American population is obese, right? So at the end of the day, if we don't figure out a way to have people take ownership in their health, this never changes. And the crazy reality is, if you want to get into the economics of it, it's interesting because maybe I've been in healthcare too long. Maybe there's other industries. I don't think so. Healthcare is the only industry I can think of that the impact of technology actually increases the total cost. People say, well, no, that can't be true. No, hey, you know, instead of getting open heart, you know, surgery for a couple $100,000, you know, now you could do a drug-eluted stent or whatever. But no, but I say now, let's just talk about economics, not social, not spiritual, whatever. Think about it. Every time now that we're able to increase your lifespan, you're now alive to get all the things you never would have gotten because you would have been dead. So this ability now to keep people alive longer, okay, there's a cost to this. And we're going to be able to keep people alive longer and longer. Well, but the cost is astronomical, particularly if people don't take care of themselves. So until we figure out a way to have people accountable for their health, I think we're on this train where the cost is going to continue to get higher. It's going to continue to get higher. And when you say, what are you going to do about it? I literally think there has to be a way, and some of this gets emotional for people, but there has to be a way where, you know what? If you're not taking care of yourself, that's going to cost you more. If you're overweight, that's going to cost you more. Because somehow, you know, you want to provide health care to everybody, but the cost of it will continue to escalate. You know, you hear these comments, well, it's 22% now of the GDP. Well, it's got to stop here. Well, mathematically, with people living as long as they're going to live, it's going to go up until we decide how people are going to take care of themselves. That's the way I think about it. What else? On any topic? Yes. Wait, students don't ask questions. You answer questions, right?
Well, I guess what I was, and this was more just to say, it's one of the things that hit home for me, and it's you're keeping it simple concept.
and I just want, if you could share it with the group.
Yeah.
The big rock, little stones, and the beer,
Oh, sure.
which I thought maybe would just be circular. I would
Yeah,
not have everyone-
yeah. So Julie actually found this, and some people have probably seen this before. What was very, very clever, there was a professor, and Julie gave me this in this article, some of you may have seen. There's a professor, if I got this straight, he has a large mayonnaise jar, and he fills it up with, let me think about this. He fills it up with rocks.
But the big stone, you put the big stones in first.
Yeah,
the big rock.
he's got the big rocks, and he fills it up, and the jar is completely full. And he said, "Hey, is this jar full now?" And the class said, "Well, yeah, no, it obviously is. It's all full." Then he ended up taking smaller pebbles and put it in, and said, "Now, is it full?" So yeah, no, it's totally full. Then they literally took sand and put the sand in, and they said, "Well, now it's full." And he said, the big rocks, small rocks, and the sand, he said, it's a little bit like your life. If you put in the smaller things first, the little things first, and you don't focus on what are the major things in your life, is it your spouse, your children, your faith? If you don't put those in first, the thing is going to end up that you're not going to have the time on the things that are most important, right? So what really are the most important things, which to a certain degree is where the self-reflection comes in of what are the things in your life that really, really matters, really, really matters. And that whole exercise of thinking about that is, you know what, the idea that, we got to fix the garbage disposal, we got to take out the laundry, you got to do, but what are the most important things, right? Spend time with your family, spend time with the things that are most important, then the little things will kind of like take care of themselves, all right? And I think the end of it that Julie added was, at the very end of this, which I think could be from the family, which actually makes sense, at the very end they said, well, what you do is, he took out a can of beer and he put the beer in, and he said, no matter how full life is, there's always room for a couple of beers. Okay? Which, for the Cleary lecture series, seems to be a great way to start that. Yeah. So thanks, everybody. Oh, last comment to make to everybody. No pressure. But you are those guys, so good luck.
I'm so glad we talked about the rocks. I was a little bummed about the health care. I was rapidly going down the tubes on that. Anyway, all right, so very enlightening, giving us a lot to think about. I got to think about my rocks, my sand, my pebbles, and some beers. But we want to thank the Clearys and Janet Knight for today. Mr. Kraemer, of course, for coming, and the foundation office, including Jay Scott, Sandy Sieber, and the people who have come here today to help us, and SBDC for this wonderful event. These things may look simple, like let's just get together for a lunch, but they're not. Finally, I want to thank you for coming, but also if you want to come again tonight, Mr. Kraemer will be in the Hesperus Auditorium in Graff Main Hall at 5:30, doing another version of this, more aimed at students, but still enlightening for us all. And we look forward to seeing you in the future at these kind of events. We're very excited in the college business in 2020, 2021. That's a mouthful to say. I can't wait till we get to the 2020s, because it's just going to be, but in 2020, 2021, we will be celebrating our 50th. And we will also be moving into the Whittick building. It'll be newly remodeled for us. So we're very excited to see a transformation in campus. We're very excited to move into a home of our own. And we're very excited to have you come along on our journey with us. So thank you very much for coming today. And I wish you a good rest of the day. Thank you.